Welcome to the Voice of Africa. Today we have a very special guest with us that goes by the name of Dr. Mena Demisay. She is the Senior Vice President of Policy Analysis and Research at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Hello, Dr. Mena. How are you doing today?
I am fine. How are you?
Doing great. So can you please tell us why you started in your field?
I started in my field as a political scientist to explore the ways in which African immigrants might be politically mobilizing in the United States and how members of Congress are representing their interests. And this came actually out of my personal passion to uplift the African community and understand how, what it means to be a child of immigrants, of African immigrants. I originally started with questions around voting trends of African immigrants in the United States, but because of how racial data is collected in the United States, there is not an opportunity to look beyond race to understand the different Black ethnic groups and how they mobilize around issues. What issues do they care about and why? Where do they live? Have they lobbied? Have they run for office? So that was what really sparked my interest in the beginning to pursue this field. And of course, with the election and re-election of President Obama, much of the world has woken up to the fact that Black people are not a monolithic group in the United States. And when we say it's a land of immigrants, it really is. And that also applies to Black people in the United States.
Right. And that's definitely a lot of insight you've given us. So what has been some of the strategic aims and goals, personally for you and this foundation?
So the goal, we have 3 goals: to develop leaders, inform the public, inform public policy, and educate the public. And our mission is to advance the global Black community across any and all policy priorities that end up marginalizing Black people. Most of what we focus on is in the United States with respect to domestic policy, but we also do work in a global space. So it is very rewarding in that the CBCF would not have existed if the Congressional Black Caucus did not exist. So to my earlier remarks about at this Legacy Global Summit for Africa conference, this potential and actualization of groupthink for Black people who have often operated for group interest as a proxy for self-interest is a very real thing that has had amazing consequences for advancing communities of color, particularly African and African American communities, both here in the United States and abroad.
Okay, that's great. So what is your ideal roadmap for anyone that you would give to anyone that wants to follow in your footpath?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, follow your heart, because what you're good at, you'll likely be great at. And there is no one way to affect change. Oftentimes we look at a resume and it looks like it was all figured out. It wasn't. I like to say, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. But in all seriousness, it is true that I didn't know I'd end up this way. I just knew that I had a passion, and I tried to work very hard and be open-minded to opportunity, because networking is a huge part of getting to where you want. It's not just being in a room studying books and getting good grades, or it's really being in the right place at the right time. And you can increase your probability of doing that by getting out there, meeting people who look like you and who don't look like you, and really being true to yourself, which means you explore things out of the traditional nature. So I was expected, for all intents and purposes, as a child of African immigrants, to become a medical doctor. And I thought that was what I was supposed to do, although it bothered me that I was not feeling as passionate about biology and chemistry as I was about law and economy and politics. And so I had to go through the rhythm and row of understanding in college that wasn't for me. Even if it was well-intentioned, it wasn't for me. So I switched to studying economics. And then, you know, just understanding that there is no perfect path. And a lot of people that make it to where I have or others have often had to go through some trials and tribulations before getting there. It didn't all just work out. You know, but you don't have to affect, you know, if you're interested in Africa and investing, you don't have to be obviously a political scientist or economist or even a business person. I mean, you can do it in many ways. You could be a teacher. You know, you could go live in Africa. You could create your own organization. It could be a nonprofit that helps support, you know, trade and investment, or, you know, for startup businesses on the continent. I mean, there's so many ways to engage. So it's good to be imaginative about that and be confident about exploring and trying new things.
Great. And thank you for touching on that as well, because I feel like, especially in this day and age with social media, everything is so fast paced. The youth, like ourselves, tend to think that, you know, you're supposed to reach your goal immediately, because we see, you know, people glorifying certain things on social media, but it really takes time. So I really appreciate you highlighting on that. What do you envision for the relationship between people in Africa and the diaspora as well?
I envision a returning to our roots, because our roots explain how we got this far in the midst of people that literally lived and breathed to make sure we didn't move on and get ahead. I mean, I've often talked about the concept of freedom and justice in the United States, which were big ideas that were never made real when Africans first came to this country as enslaved Africans. And the fact that our people imagined creatively ideas of liberation, equality, abolishment of slavery before it was ever realized, you know, that's what I mean by sort of powerful, like dreaming made real. And if they did not dream and feel that they could conquer, you know, their dreams, we would not be liberated. And so I concept the Pan-African Congresses that convened, the concept of the Africa Union itself. I mean, this is so inherent almost in our culture to think about community, that we should not try to stray from that. Oftentimes we feel like we have to do something new and different. You don't have to do new and different if what is old and the same has been working really well for you. And for African people, there's so much power in the collective. And we've seen that get us to where we are now. So that's I want us all to be honest about how race and racism continue to marginalize our people here and abroad. I want us to be honest about the repercussions of colonization in Africa and slavery in the United States, and understand that any forces that are trying to divide Black people are a consequence of a divide and conquer strategy. Because it's like, I get goosebumps when I think about the last scene in Black Panther, which, you know, that whole movie was revolutionary because it really highlighted, like, oh my gosh, what if we all just went back to our roots? We could literally take over. So when you hear, you know, Ambassador Dr. Chiakana talk about so what does she call it? The Wakanda villages that she imagines happening in Africa, where they're self-sustained. These are things that can happen. And actually they did happen. We had to rebuild, our ancestors had to rebuild from nothing, stripped of everything they knew, and having to start over again. I mean, the decolonization of Africa it's not that long ago. I mean, Ghana was first in 1957. That's not that long ago, right? Civil rights movement in the United States, not that long ago. So, you know, and so there are examples where sometimes we talk about historic acts or legislation in isolation of context. And, you know, I always have to give credit to my advisor, Dr. Haynes Walton, who was the first Black man to get his PhD in political science at Howard University. And all his books in political science and he was a professor at the University of Michigan, created this subfield of Black politics, and it allowed us to understand. So he came up with this term like political context, like to understand the moment. Like we're in the middle of figuring out who the next president of the United States is going to be, but we have to understand why it's such a problem. Like, why are people going crazy? Why is Trump here after Obama? That political context is important. Why is the person who started the birther movement the president after President Obama? How did that happen and why? Like, these are things that we have to unpack. So, I just think it's really important that we understand the role that institutions that are for liberating Black people are just as important as any other mainstream westernized or Eurocentric institution that has a lot of power and capital. We have equally, look at the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. No other country in the world was going to encourage an agreement like that, except for Africa for Africans. It's not in their interest to do that, right? To have African people join hands across borders in this way. So that's what I'm saying, right? Like, there are forces that don't want things to happen, but then when these things happen, they want to profit from it. So we have to we are the ones that are going to give credibility to institutions like ECOWAS and AU and all of these African, heads of state that have been working together as a united force against oppression, right? Those things cannot get lost. So when you talk about AGOA, it's not like US had an epiphany and decided that Africa can now be a trade partner. Go back to apartheid. It took 15 years over Reagan's veto to divest from South Africa. Why? Was it because the United States just realized that apartheid was wrong? No, it was because members of the Congressional Black Caucus, again, who thought about the group interest of their African brothers and sisters abroad, like Congressman Ron Dellums, another person who co-founded the Congressional Black Caucus, who sponsored the legislation that ended up passing in 1986 with the Comprehensive Anti-Apartheid Act. That was because of Black people in the United States who were fighting civil rights, not just for African Americans in the United States, but on behalf of the US abroad. And so those stories get lost, and then we kind of give credit to people who don't deserve it, and then we dismiss the value proposition and the currency of our own institutions that we created to liberate ourselves. And so the AU becomes very instrumental, and we have to hold the AU accountable, but it makes us realize that don't keep those entities on the side, make them a central part of Africa's destiny for the future.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much. That was very information packed, and I'm sure our audience could definitely learn from that as well. Can you tell us your thoughts about the Legacy Global Summit?
Yeah, I love Dr. Remy. I love her energy. I love her vision. I think that a lot of this is around congregating the right people who are thinking in similar ways about Africa's development and growth. And so this has been an extraordinary conference in the middle of a global pandemic. She is right there making things happen so that we stay connected, because, Africa needs us and we need Africa. And it's important that the right players be at the table to define the moment and strategize on how to make it better. So I appreciate having this kind of conversation around investment and trade and capital. And as I mentioned, giving my remarks at the conference, I appreciate spaces to allow for people like myself who come from a political science background to have a role in these discussions. It's really important. I actually recall the State Department a couple years ago when the Prime Minister of Ethiopia came to power, Dr. Abiy Ahmed. The State Department in DC was just having a field day with, wow, like all this potential for reentry and business opportunity. And there was a huge conference that was similar to the Legacy Global Summit, but it was focused primarily on Ethiopia's kind of emerging market economy in light of the new prime minister. And I was in the room with maybe 500 other people. And it was, again, celebration, excitement, discussions about US investment in Africa. And a lot of us who identify with the country and the people and the politics understood that this needed to be sustainable and that nobody in the room was talking about political stability. So I actually asked a question, and both the US ambassador to Ethiopia and the Ethiopian ambassador to the US were on the panel. And I said, you know, this is a great moment, but I don't hear anyone talking about how any of this economic trade and growth potential will be sustainable with the political stability, you know, potential for political instability. And I said, the only reason we're even in this room excited about economic opportunity is because of the shift in political leadership. Like, we wouldn't even be talking about economic growth if we were in a different scenario. So how do we have those conversations? How do we facilitate a healthy, political, stable environment that allows for economic growth? And so I love that I can be part of this conference and have those conversations with the Legacy Global Summit. I think there's a lot of potential, and it's a reminder that we don't need to wait for anybody to have impact, and we have to legitimize our own spaces to understand how we can leverage our own power in these ways. And this is where the diaspora becomes incredibly important. You know, so I hope that other entities and groups of people will continue to value our voices and, you know, work with us, because we have the comprehensive outlook on what Africa needs. Because again, you know, if you have capital, you have choices. And the way a capitalist system works, it doesn't require you to think about the masses. You don't have to. So when we talk about, oh, it's great that our friend just opened up this you know, business and is making so much money and living in a huge mansion while tens of millions of other people are not, you know, who is that success really for? And we cannot force people into investing in certain sectors, but what we can do is provide incentives and government incentives and policies and data information that helps business investors understand, and even trade partners, other countries, understand where the gaps are,
right,
so that we can diversify our investment. This happens all the time. You can get tax incentives, you know, to implement state-based policies that maybe some states wouldn't implement otherwise, right? Like, you can create incentives for investors to come and invest in profitable, even profit-driven, you know, shelter homes or schools, and I mean, there are ways to do that, and libraries and health facilities, right? I mean, it can be twofold, that you benefit personally, but that you also benefit society. But it has to be, that information needs to be shared. We have to collect better data to understand what the needs are. A lot of African diasporans, we give back, we formalize remittances, we spend over $40 billion. I mean, it's hundreds of billions of dollars that goes back to Africa, and that potential is huge. And if we formalize it in the way the Africa Union is doing with the free trade agreement, we also have potential. That's essentially what we try to do and are trying to do with the Ethiopian Diaspora Trust Fund, is we didn't wait on anybody. It was all volunteer based, and we raised $6 million from 25,000 Ethiopian diaspora people all around the world. And we created our own institutions to do a request for proposals from businesses residing or organizations residing in Ethiopia. That was one of our requirements. They had to be based in the country, and that we would fund them so that they could do more the work that they're doing. And I mean, to me, it's I refer to it as the first modern day mechanism of formalized remittances for Africans by Africans. That's that, and I hope this model gets, you know, spread across the continent.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mando. It was very information packed, and you know, we hope we can stay in contact with you and help move Africa to the place it's supposed to be.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate the
No
interview.
problem.